Belief is both complex and complicated, and I have been on more than one occasion confronted by questions pertaining to my own beliefs, positions, and stances. This is very understandable, because to those who pay attention to my words, they are often accompanied by the apparition of seeming indecisiveness, and thus can result in the confusing impression that I believe nothing, or that it is my position to simply sit on a fence until the untimely end of the world. From my own vantage point, I can see how one might receive this impression, even if I am inclined to deny that such an impression is correct. I am merely very, perhaps exceedingly cautious about proclaiming my beliefs to the world because, and this is crucial, I find myself in the constant process of revising my beliefs, and when the data are available, fact-checking them. In the last 15 years, and more critically 10 years, I have had to question the inconsistency of long-held beliefs about the world, about human beings, our social institutions, and at times the very bedrock of what constitutes human civilization. In this, I am sure, I am not alone. Sometimes this line of questioning can lead to what one calls taking the red pill. Sometimes not. At times, we call those who hopelessly recycle antiquated and incorrect beliefs blue-pilled. But whatever we might be inclined to call those who question and those who do not, the net result of calling everything I had thought I had known into question was a fundamental shift in how I approached the world and its constituent bits and parts. Tempting as it was to cleave to positions that offered the fragile illusion of certainty, I could no longer do so. And it has been ever thus that in light of the abandonment of any facade of certainty, I have had to temper my beliefs by more stringent measures of evidence. In short, I am constantly rethinking what I believe based on what I think to be the preponderance of evidence before me. Revision is an inevitability to me, not a possibility, since our knowledge will forever remain incomplete. YouTube, however, is not the best ecosystem for such an approach to things. YouTube is, more often than not, neatly divided into trending topics, ideologies, clickbait, and the like, and the factions that deal with these things, each representing a particular view concerning said matters, and therefore most YouTubers, by the very nature of how YouTube works, will be, rightly or wrongly, pigeonholed into one such box or category. Because of the nature of the YouTube ecosystem and its interactions, not only will deviations from the assumed superstructure not be well understood, at times they will be looked upon with antagonism, with the masses madly rushing to put anyone who parts from the conventional orthodoxy into whatever category makes them feel most comfortable given their views. And it is into this finely hewn pigeonhole I have been thrust many a time, indeed so many times that I have lost count. This needed to be stated, if only to create the background for what I wish to examine as a broader phenomenon. Contrary to what we may be inclined to believe, most people do not hold beliefs because they are well supported by facts and evidence. Rather, they hold the beliefs they have because they find it rewarding to do so. Specifically, beliefs, like any other thing human beings interact with, are subject to the same neurochemical reactions that the consumption of a slice of chocolate cake might elicit, namely dopaminergic reactions. But before proceeding, what specifically do I mean by dopaminergic reactions? Without becoming overly technical, which would exceed the purposes of this video, anytime someone is engaged in an activity that is pleasurable, dopamine is produced in dopaminergic neurons in the midbrain, and dopamine signals to the person that this pleasurable activity bears repeating, and is worthy of being sought after again. Now, there is an entire literature on dopamine receptor downregulation, and that would be an interesting video in and of itself, because this neurochemical system can be abused. However, here, I merely wish to point out that beyond many other functions, where reward is involved, so too is dopamine, and the release of dopamine is not contingent merely on the purely physical, such as with drugs, ice cream, or sex. Abstract beliefs have dopaminergic interactions too, and these can be very complex, and even vary genetically. Let's listen to the following excerpt taken from a publication called Linking Unfounded Beliefs to Dopamine Availability. Quote, Unfounded convictions involving beliefs in the paranormal, grandiosity ideas, or suspicious thoughts are endorsed at varying degrees among the general population. Here we investigated the neurobiopsychological basis of the observed inter-individual variability in the propensity towards unfounded beliefs. 102 healthy individuals were genotyped for 4 polymorphisms in the COMT gene: RS6269, RS4633, RS4818, and RS4680, also known as VAL15A-MET, that define common functional haplotypes with substantial impact on synaptic dopamine degradation. They completed a questionnaire measuring unfounded beliefs and took part in a behavioral experiment assessing perceptual inference. We found that greater dopamine availability was associated with a stronger propensity towards unfounded beliefs, and that this effect was statistically mediated by an enhanced influence of expectations on perceptual influence. Our results indicate that genetic differences in dopaminergic neurotransmission account for inter-individual differences in perceptual inference linked to the formation and maintenance of unfounded beliefs. Thus, dopamine might be critically involved in the processes underlying one's interpretation of the relationship between the self and the world." End quote. Or, put more simply, in other words, dopamine is just as vital to belief structure as it is to anything else. Part of this goes back to my recent video covering why people do things. Specifically in that video, I stated that people do not operate off of facts, information, and data. The simplest possible answer to why people do things, in this context at least, is dopamine, which drives them to act, and consequently the question, why do people believe, can likewise at least partially be answered in that, inasmuch as dopamine availability is integral to belief, and it probably is, it too must play a role. If, as is suggested by some of the research, unfounded beliefs are associated with greater dopamine availability, which is further regulated by genetic differences between individuals, we can reasonably conclude that people do not typically base their beliefs on the relevance of evidence and measured thought, but more likely than not because of a more primitive neurochemical mechanism. If a belief system that is largely unsupported by evidence offers greater rewards, neurochemically speaking, it is probably going to be preferred to a belief system that does not offer commensurate rewards, even if the latter vastly exceeds the former in terms of the evidence supporting it. Disturbances to established belief systems, such as contradictions, counter-evidence, are thus, neurochemically speaking, counterproductive and should be avoided at all costs following this logic. Facts, evidence, and data are indeed poor motivators. Now, I'm not claiming that people are never motivated by facts, evidence, and data. I am merely stating that there are other, more complicating factors involved, and that these neurochemical factors might have a greater influence than is typically assumed when we think of why people hold certain beliefs and represent them. Nonetheless, I am not, and probably cannot be, that person whose neurochemical health and regularity rests on the maintenance of a static belief system that is not subject to change from external data. This causes me and those like me problems because the architecture of any belief system we maintain needs to be upgraded on a fairly regular basis, and the end result, at least to the outside world, is that of the impression of either a perpetual fence-sitter or someone mercurial at best, but these interpretations are to my mind incorrect. The shattering of the blue pill worldview for something more complex, intricate, and frankly speaking frightening forever left me vulnerable to the necessity to correct my own views. What I believe now is not what I believed 1 year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10, and so it goes. Now, I can also acknowledge simultaneously the fact that, for most of our lives, we have incomplete knowledge and information, and there are many situations that arise that call for action without having a complete picture of things. I concede that too much caution can at times lead to the paralysis of both body and mind, but we must also be mindful of the converse. That is to say, that too little caution and operating off of incomplete assumptions carries with it enormous destructive potential, both individually and collectively. For my part, I choose to err on the side of caution, and thus responsibility, before making declarative statements on important subjects, and given the relative vacuity and lack of seriousness of YouTube, I don't think it particularly harmful to maintain this view or this methodology. And as for the reward for this stance and approach, I can only speculate, and I can only say that I would find it very difficult to live with myself, or even tolerate myself, if I did not adhere to the principles outlined previously. Whatever superficial reward they may or may not bring, I wish to have an accurate picture of the world, and I will pay the price, come what may, for it. Thanks for tuning in. As always, links to the research on dopamine and belief can be found in the low bar, and should Providence shine its glorious light upon me, I shall see you next time. Take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.